现在又出来了。
它现在变，可是这样不对啊，它这样变 default， 可是 default 的声音，是 default 的声音。
Recognize public preaching and study groups. While I certainly hope to expand the number of interviews in the future, these 5 are highly representative of the group. Due to time constraints, however, I will not quote directly from our conversations in today's presentation. They each have remarkable personal stories, but I won't go into those details today. All of them are highly educated and exceptionally capable individuals. They are required to take a full-time position at the Tzu Chi Foundation, live in the abode, and assist the nuns in their daily responsibilities. Among the 5, 4 did not grow up in Taiwan. 2 are Malaysian, and the other 2 immigrated to Hong Kong or the United States with their families. The demographic profile of the pure practitioners is significant. I mean, this is kind of an overall, even though I only interviewed 5 of them, but according to them, many of the pure practitioners are overseas Chinese. Only a smaller portion of them are from Taiwan. So, I mean, this data is quite significant. It suggests that the pure practitioners are not a locally bounded phenomena, but part of a transnational formation shaped by mobility, diaspora networks, and global education. They exemplify how a Taiwanese Buddhist formation selectively absorbs global flows. In this sense, they exemplify how Tzu Chi integrates globally mobile subjects into a morally regulated lay monastic partnership. How should we define the pure practitioners? A phrase frequently used to describe them is a monastic mind, lay outfit, 出家心，在家身. This captures their distinctive position. They do renounce household life, and they cultivate discipline and inward commitment that resembles monastic aspiration. Their formation rests on several key elements. First, wholehearted dedication, meaning that service is not occasional volunteering, but a life-oriented commitment. Second, community life, which emphasizes collective discipline rather than individual spirituality. Third, they actively support both the Tzu Chi Foundation and the Jingsi Abode, often serving in roles comparable to assistant deacons. Finally, they pursue moral and academic excellence, integrating ethical cultivation with study. In developing this analysis, I relied in part on Pan Cuiyun's 2024 MA thesis from Tzu Chi University. Importantly, Pan is also one of the pure practitioners I interviewed, which adds an especially reflexive dimension to the study. Historically, there are precedents for reconfiguring monastic lay boundaries. For example, the Bodhisattva monks, Pusasen, supported by the state during the Northern Zhou. Furthermore, Chinese fasting religions promoted vegetarian discipline and home-based practice, legitimizing rigorous cultivation outside monasteries and foreshadowing modern lay-centered Buddhist formations. We do have a detailed study by Professor Chen Jinhua on the Bodhisattva monks. His article draws on primary sources to examine a rather unusual institution established by Emperor Xuan of the Northern Zhou. During a period of Buddhist persecution, the emperor created the Bodhisattva monk category as a way to preserve monastic Buddhism under political pressure. Once the persecution ended, the institution was quickly dissolved. What is particularly interesting is the narrative that monastic robes were not essential to authentic Buddhist identity. This episode reveals an early attempt to redefine what constitutes a monk, suggesting that ethical commitment, rather than external appearance, could serve as a core marker of religious legitimacy. I need water, sorry. It is also meaningful to compare Japanese Buddhism with it in historical context. For example, in Neither Monk Nor Layman, Richard Jeffy explores how clerical marriage and meat eating shifted from a doctrinal flashpoint to a lived norm in modern Japanese Buddhism. Jeffy links these changes to a longer history, including pre-Meiji precedents and Jodo Shinshu defenses of clerical marriage, which shaped subsequent debates. Ultimately, Jeffy shows why the tension between discipline and modernity persisted, leaving the clergy socially laicized, yet institutionally monastic. Okay, I will skip some of the slides. Now, plural, I have to emphasize that all of the debates in Japan, they were under the framework of nationalism. Tzu Chi, by contrast, Tzu Chi intensifies lay discipline in civil society, so their trajectories are not the same. Do I have 2 or 3 minutes or 3 minutes? 2, okay. Which slide should I talk? Okay, maybe this one. So plural Buddhist modernities emerge through different institutional experiments and ethical reorganizations. East Asia provides a key site where modernity unfolds in culturally embedded experimental forms. As Einstein argues modernity is plural, not singular, his multiple modernity thesis rejects any necessary convergence upon a single Western pattern of modernization. He emphasizes that modernity's development entails the continual constitution and reconstitution of cultural programs by specific social actors, intellectuals, religious leaders, organizational elites who translate older symbolic resources into new institutional forms. Within this landscape, Tzu Chi represents a distinct Buddhist moral modernity, lay-centered, organizationally codified, and globally scalable. So I think I can jump to the conclusion. I mean, in the middle of the slides that I skipped, I wanted to talk how the Tzu Chi's precepts was very effective in the organizational management. That Zheng Yan had a very clever idea about everyone governs his own mind. Then it's easy to govern the whole organization through the precepts. Now, in conclusion, the pure practitioners illuminate how ethics are translated into organization and how compassion becomes codified into durable institutional form. They embody a lay-centered moral modernity in which disciplined self-cultivation operates within civil society. Together, they reveal a distinctively Taiwanese model of global Buddhist modernities, structured, scalable, and ethically grounded. Okay, thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Lin. Actually, I have some questions for you, but I'll just be quiet. So next we have Liu Zhan of National Zhengzhi University.
Okay, I'm really sorry, but however, I need to thank Professor He help me to create a new topic. Okay, my name is Yu Zhen. I have a research Bhikkhuni biographies of Taiwan of Chinese Buddhism from the Tang Dynasty to the end of Qing Dynasty, and I found out historically, Bhikkhuni biographies were compiled as a collection, appended to biographies of monks, and Bhikkhuni's life stories were written from a sectarian perspective. Notable example including the Biqiuni Zhuan, paired to Mingsheng Zhuan from the Vinaya school, and also the Chan Pozi in Chan Koan, as well as the Shan Yuren Zhuan and the Jingtu Shengxian Lu from the Pure Land tradition. But people living in 50 years ago, they couldn't imagine there could be a kind of biography called Jara that features standard alone and publicly available biography dedicated to a single nun. This is a very new phenomena. Okay, so I decided to study the biographies, Bhikkhuni biographies in post-war Taiwan in terms of their publishing models and their functional aspects. And my conclusion is that these biographies served as the medium for Bhikkhuni's images, but automatically they also shaping Bhikkhuni's charisma. That's my conclusion. Okay, and we can see I divided, I have collected and analyzed Bhikkhuni biographies after 1949 in Taiwan and found out I divided them into 3 stages. And before the lift of martial laws, there's no Bhikkhuni biographies. The only exception is Shou Yun's. And actually, she is a nun, moved to Taiwan from Hong Kong in 1967. We have a very romantic name for her. It's a San Mao. Traveling girls, She wrote a lot of travelogues from 1967. So it kind of important information, biological information for her. But then after the martial laws, there are 8 Bhikkhuni biographies appear, and half of them are posthumous biographies. And the third stage, 11 bhikkhuni biographies dedicated to 13 nuns. And we can see there are only 4 posthumous biographies. Excuse me. And we can see before the lifting of martial laws in 1997, we can see the situation here. Okay. And to sum up, in terms of the group, I mean the organization, these nuns belonging to Tzu Ji ranked the first. They published the most biographies of Venerable Zheng Yan. And the Xiangguang and the academic historic, they both published 3 volumes. And for Fo Guangshan, it's very interesting because they didn't publish any biographies of its eminent bhikkhunis. Only after the death of Xingyun, then they began a huge program to publish the biographies of their elder nuns. Okay. And whether self-written or compiled from interviews during their lifetimes or published as posthumous biographies, the number of bhikkhuni biographies has steadily increased. Okay, so I think this means the visibility of Taiwanese nuns too. And my usage of autobiography or biographies, they are interchangeable, okay? Because from my perspective, these biographies were compiled by the author based on the interviews. And the difference is monks, the autobiography of monks or ghost writers made it, but those monks won't use the real name of authors. But for these nuns, they were very happy to introduce their authors. That's the difference. And let's compare, in addition to standard alone volume, we still have collected biographies of monks and nuns. But if we compare Fo Guangshan's publication and the Luminary Xiangguang Nizhi Senga's publication, we can find out. Fo Guangshan have published 3 volumes. The first volume is the biography of Master Xingyun. The second volume is the story of sorry, the word is so small. Story of Fo Guangshan carrying on the past and the opening of the future. It interviewed 18 disciples. And in 2020, they won Master Xingyun and the disciple of Fo Guangshan. It included 25 more disciples. Okay, and for the nuns publication, the famous Luminary Nunnery, they published 3 independent volumes. One is for Tianyi, the other is for Mingzong, the third is for Wu Yin. Wu Yin is the founder of the Luminary Sangha. And Mingzong, Wu Yin received attention from Mingzong. But Tianyi is a very important nun. She set the Dharma lineage for these nunneries. And she is famous for her words during the ordination. Bhikkhuni should be educated as capable as monks to do anything they want. Okay, he's a very important figure. And the principle of Fo Guangshan is disciples should help their masters to write the history. And the principle of Xiangguang nunneries is bhikkhuni should write their own history. That's the difference. And Xiangguang, the luminary nunnery, also trained a team of their nuns to write those biographies for nuns. Okay. And of course, you can see the most frequently published biographies is that of Venerable Sheng Yan. And let's read the name, okay? In 1984, the first biography, very brief. Okay, the title is The Ciji World of Master Sheng Yan. Then Zheng Yan. Then Master Zheng Yan and the Ciji World. Then the Ciji World of Master Zheng Yan. Then Master Zheng Yan and the Ciji World. And Master Zheng Yan's crystal lotus mandala. Master Zheng Yan and the Ciji. You can see those biographies successfully connected Master Zheng Yan with Ciji. And each is written from Master Zheng Yan's perspective, but reflecting the faith development theme of Ciji at that time. So this also reveals Master Zheng Yan's characteristic as a religious and social leader in each stage. And this small booklet is very important. It has been circulated nearly 800,000 copies. Okay, and established the image of 弱女子 building a hospital. Okay. And the next two, you all know. And this Zhao Xianming, all biographies are published by Ciji Foundation or Tianxia, but this one is published by like an outsider. You all familiar with this book, right? Okay, let's compare. The earliest version of Zheng Yan Fa Shi's biographies is published in 1989, but the earliest version is published in 1984. And the number means chapters. Okay, the main theme of the chapter. You can see from even the national leaders came to help her to build up the hospital. Okay. And then, can we see the red line? Okay, chapter 10, and then chapter 14 and 15 talk about the compassion comes from Venerable Zheng Yan's vow. And the last chapter, the chapter 17, try to introduce who is Zheng Yan. And the answer is weak women, 弱女子. Okay. And about 10 years later, we got another book, and you can see the chapter 8 already illuminated the goal of Zheng Yan and this Ciji Foundation is to 预约人间净土. And chapter 9 and chapter 10, she became very famous because he was awarded the Roman Magsaysay Award, and then she was addressed Taiwan's Mother Teresa. And from chapter 11 and 12, go back to the older theme. She's a known woman, she's ordinary bhikkhunis, but now he become a Bodhisattva. Okay? So this is the I'm trying to say, use a theory of mediatization, okay? Because not only Venerable Zheng Yan, or almost every famous bhikkhuni leaders in Taiwan now, they all publish, they all own their own biographies, okay? And this is the main images about their contribution to Buddhism on this side. And the other side, I pick up the key words from their biographies. These words are repeatedly appears. You can see, for example, Venerable Zheng Yan, they become related to Bodhisattva Path, international NGO, these kind of words. And for Huan, because she established the first Buddhist university in Taiwan. So it's kind of integration of Buddhism and Confucian and dual order education, these kind of things. And for Venerable Zhao Hui, feminist, and for Venerable Wu Yin, Wu Yin created a very important vision of Taiwanese now for the sky of Bhikkhuni, to describe Taiwan as the sky of Bhikkhunis. Okay. So more publication by Bhikkhunis and higher visibility of their religious groups. And for these kind of biographies, they are not only for personal writing, they belong to a kind of systematic group publishing. And that, when the organization become bigger, they will tend to publish more biographies. And I think this is very reasonable, because when we define a charisma, we always focus on personal contact. But when the organization getting so big, not everyone get a chance to get in touch with the leader. So these books use words to link you and the master together, okay? And so conclusion. So the disparate ratio of publication volumes is positively correlated with the size of groups, organization. And I'm trying to add something, one more thing, okay. I divide, according to the theme of the biographies of Zheng Yan, I divided the development of her charisma into 3 stages. The first stage is the early stage. We need to find out the way she practiced her personal talent, and even the why she will become a very successful nun. And the second stage is you have to gather certain kind of authority to build up the community. You need to legitimize your authority for the institutionalization. And the third stage, as a religious leader, you have to transform your charisma. Religious charisma become a social credibility. And I think from the biography of Zheng Yan, we found out these 3 stages. That's why I use the title, Charisma Could Be Written by Words. In Taiwan, especially publication is very important for nuns. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Yujin. Okay, our next speaker is Professor Julia Huang of National Tsinghua University.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to thank Tzu Foundation and Professor He for inviting me. And it's really an honor to be here with this stellar list of scholars in the same room. And I'm so glad to be back in Boston. And okay, so, and I also want to thank everyone who was so kind, generous, spoke to me for this project. So today, let me just begin with a story, an anecdote. Miss Song's mother had long decided to donate her whole body to medical science, even before she was diagnosed with the terminal cancer. Miss Song described nervously the 3 crises her mother encountered that nearly took away her eligibility. Her mother successfully survived these crises by choosing intubation instead of a tracheotomy, and thus keeping her body intact. By avoiding an edema and by making it to the medical school in Hualien, eastern Taiwan, within 8 hours from death, despite the fact that the Cross Island Road between Taichung, her hometown on central West Taiwan, and Hualien, where the medical school, Tzu Medical School, was closed on the day she died. Quote, "My mother had never been to Hualien in her life," Ms. Song said, "so I was worried that she'd feel alone here." Ms. Song visited her mother's body from Taichung every week during the first 100 days after her death, the so-called 百日 in Han Chinese funeral post-mortem practice, in traditional Han Chinese mourning. She then continued with monthly visits throughout the wait. I quote, "I wanted to keep her company," she said tenderly. On the day of commemoration, after the completion of a 4-day surgical simulation, she proudly concluded, "After exactly 1 year, today, my mother's wish to become a teacher has finally come true." So, Ms. Song's mother is one of over 1,400 whole-body donors at the Tzu Medical School in Taiwan since 1995. Like in most of the family's narratives, Ms. Song faced challenges in caring for her mother. Care almost always involves a challenging decision. It is even more so when the weight of life is at stake, a matter of life or death. There is one very big difference in Ms. Song's retrospect. The challenge she faced and the consequent decisions she made were not to extend her mother's life, but to fulfill her mother's wish for a whole-body donation upon death. The crises Ms. Song described here are common among the many stories I've heard or read about the family caregiver and the donor care recipients. It appears that the subject of the focus of the care has extended to include the form of a dead body beyond the lifespan of the dying patient. I came across narratives like Ms. Song's while conducting fieldwork on whole-body donations for medical science in Taiwan, a movement commonly referred to by the title of the cadaver, silent mentor, 无语良师, or gross anatomy teacher, 大体老师. Tzu has sparked an uptick in the number of voluntary donation for the compulsory course of gross anatomy since 1995. With the influx of dead bodies at capacity, in 2002, the medical school opened the Center for Clinical Anatomy and Operation Simulation. Each year, the center holds 6 to 8 week-long simulation workshops on cadavers that were preserved by flash freeze instead of the traditional method of formalin for gross anatomy. The medical school holds a series of elaborate and solemn commemorations of the donor. This is one of the funeral parade procession with commemoration of the donors with names and of their families without names. Faculty and students at the medical school, as well as the monastics and lay devotees of Tzu, participated in the commemoration ceremonies. The process has been palpably multimedia, in line with Tzu's approach to other causes such as disaster relief, both in Taiwan and around the world in 136 countries. There have also been an increasing number of academic research on the program. Most of them are focusing on its impact on medical education, such as this one, 2022. I conducted participant observation in the ceremonies in Hualien in 2012, 13, 15, and 2024. Since 2024, I have also been participating in the commemoration for care for cadaver donors at a secular university in northern Taiwan, which is much smaller in scale. Based on my early fieldwork, I examined the silent mentor movement in the context of the Buddhist, I think it's Onuma, her term, gift of the body genre. Tzu Chi highlighted the moral ethic of equanimity, 舍 in Mandarin, or upeksha in Sanskrit, okay, correct. I'm looking at the Weirun, okay. Instead of generosity, dana in Sanskrit. Because I argue the main currency in this paper, the main currency in becoming a silent mentor is the emotional practices in turning the donation into a good death. I posit that the answer lies in the power of a ritual transformation wherein the pivotal role of pain, the imagined one on the dead body and the actual one on the bereaved, in turning a dead body for dissection into a good death. Since then, I was able to speak to a few more family members outside the ceremonies and Tzu Chi settings. It's very difficult. My original question was quite simple. How was the decision made? The so-called decision to donate, as it turned out, was a process from a few days to several years and involved multiple negotiations. What surprised me the most, among other things, was for many of them, just how many details the bereaved could account for. My previous publication and much existing research focused on the journey and the donor's dead body to become a silent mentor. It wasn't until I was given the privilege of individual interviews outside the ritual context that I came to realize that the actual donation was, in fact, the end of a multiple year of long-term care. So my main question just for this paper is, how does the decision to donate one's whole body affect the care? How can we learn about the nature of end-of-life care from the perspectives of the donor's care? So my theoretical perspective is more, I'm inspired by the anthropology of ethics. In recent decades, anthropology has taken an ethical turn. And I argue that the whole body donation enables and facilitates the ethicalization of the end of life in the traditional Han Chinese culture. So here, just give you one of the definition of ethic, which is in this paper, just some clarification. Because in Buddhism, there's also ethic. It's a sila. And but this is it's different. I'm not using ethic as a rules to follow, like in common English language, and it is particularly like here. One of the definition is it refers to the conscious practice of freedom. So it is, I quote, the considered form that freedom takes when it is informed by reflection. So I follow Lailo's reiteration of Foucault, and I use the definition like this one. In this paper, I discuss that, so ethicalization for me refers to the process of making sense of relations through actions that are selected under the reflection of freedom as a project of self-cultivation and making oneself, subject of virtue. Say, for example, like filial piety, you can follow the rule, like the template of 24 stories of filial piety, 24 xiao, and you can also select performance in the funeral rites or choose a certain interpretation of the funeral and interpretation of your own interpretation, your own engagement practice of the long-term care, the end of life, to make yourself a filial son. So this is how I begin. And by engaging the anthropology of ethics, this paper will also try to address some issues related to care. Recent anthropology of care has begun to problematize care that moving beyond the Western conceptualization of individualism, independence, and autonomy, and even bringing back virtue and ethics. Works that are based on ethnography, such as Jim Toft's work in Vietnam, argue for a new trend to put care in the cultural context beyond the dyad of caregiver and care recipients. So my argument in this paper would be the whole body donation as modeled in the silent mental program enabled the ethicalization of the end of life in the traditional Han Chinese culture, particularly the traditional Han Chinese funeral, because it's such a huge topic. And like since, say, James Watson here at Harvard, and he talked about Chinese funeral is orthopraxy, that you don't need to believe in anything, but you just do the same thing. And he even concentrated on 9 actions that every Chinese funeral rite would include. And Xu Fuquan, who has a huge collection of Chinese funeral, and talk about these 4 major elements of Chinese funeral. And all these steps, so Han Chinese culture funeral is very structured action, and it's ideological, heavily ideological and pragmatic, such as feng shui and manipulation of feng shui. And there's allow little room for emotion and affects. And ethicalization of the end-of-life care. Here I talk about ethicalization through, I think, 2 things, 2 aspects. One is the affordance of emotion and affect. And here I give you the definition of affordance from Webb Kian. Ethical affordance means the aspect of people experience of themselves, of other people, or their surrounding that they may draw on as they make ethical evaluations and decisions, whether conscious or not. And the other ethicalization is through the ritual performance that makes the value desirable. This is from anthropologist Victor Turner and further elaborated by Joel Robbins. And the affordance of emotion and affect, that making these family members of the family of donors, that they are subject of virtue and freedom. On one part, it's the utilitarian imagery that's making, donating their body would directly make useful to medical science. And Copeman, he called this utilitarian imagery. The other side is what I call moral career of the dead body, that one's moral career doesn't end when one dies, that one can extend to have another journey of moral career, another chance of moral career by donating body and becoming a body-giving bodhisattva. And the ritual part I will not talk about today is after participating in so many, quite a few times of the ceremony, that I find it really provide the perfect forms of a Chinese funeral and making the value, the core value itself desirable. So let me just give you 2 examples. One is teacher pen, because every donor is referred to as teacher, 老师. And so in this case, her youngest son took care of her for 14 years. That it's not, and then it's always by himself only until the very recent year that he started employing a migrant worker. It's not because they couldn't afford. They're a very affluent family. It's what Gimeltov talk about, the calibrating of care, because the bonding between the mother and son. So toward the end, since 2022, and for 4 or 5 years, she was in and out of hospital. And so there was so much detail Mr. Pan could tell me about every single decision he made and when exactly they start planning on that donating. So I want to talk about many of them. One is, first of all, decision, making this donation, it sounds like just one decision, but it actually takes years, and also take years of completing the wish, including like the first story I told you, the preserving the body, and also how they can make to the hospital in time. And in this quite toward the end, they already decide to move their mother to the hospital in order for a timely delivery, and while her mother had already deteriorated, and one of the Tzu Chi volunteers told him, like, it's about time. If you want to make it to the Jingshi, to the center abode in time, and for Shifu, the nuns, the monastic, to receive her, that you need to leave early in the morning. And so they told him, you need to tell her it's time. And he hesitated, and he said, that he just, in the end, he was the one who had to tell her, like, not really tell her to go, but just remind her, are you ready today? If it's not, then, we can wait until tomorrow. And he said to me, to himself, he said, isn't this too cruel? Well, all right, in the end, I have to be the bad guy. He was the one who took care of her for 14 years. And another story is teacher Liu, that this is his wife, like by the time, he was also in, and two of his sons were medical physicians, they're also physicians, and they were very familiar with the whole process, but he decided to donate long even before Tzu Chi launched the program. And he carried a card of just handwritten notes that he wanted to donate his body, his organs, and everything. And but toward the end, he was suffering edema, and so his wife had to tell him in the ICU, like, this is where I recorded. He said, the social worker said, if the edema doesn't go away, it's not possible to make your wish come true. And really, and she looked at me, that flattening just started. Really, it's true. Everyone saw it. His hand, the puffy, gradually flattened, really. By the time he's ready the next day, he's within the standard and so become eligible. So there were so many of these negotiations when you are facing the very end of life, and you need to continue in order to facilitate to make their wish come true. So in this process, we can see in the long-term care, sometimes at the end, the caregiver has developed an adjacent self with the care recipient at the end of life, and being accompanied and on the journey to become a silent mentor. And further, I want to talk about, I just want to say more like taking the perspective of looking at death as a silence. I'm quoting from my former PhD advisor, his book on silence, that silence is neither a thing nor the absence of a thing, but it is instead always part of a relationship. And so the account of the sort of the similar to Karen Barron's intra-action and the Marisol de la Condena's constituted in practice. The accounts of the final days were, I would see that as a space that donors and the interviewees, so the bereaved, shape together even when the donors are dead and silent. So just a final remark. So I see like this familism that Tzu Chi's silent mentors set up, sort of freeing all the Taiwanese from the structured, auto-practiced Chinese funeral rites. That being aware of there is a freedom to choose one way to die and to end your life, and without being a bad son, a bad family, a bad daughter, or a bad wife. So the whole body donation for medical science, as modeled by Tzu Chi's silent mentor program, enabled the ethicalization, of the end of life in traditional Han Chinese culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Huang. And now we have comments by Professor Jonathan Gold and Pierce Sagil. Okay, and now we have comments by Professor Pierce Sagil.
Yeah, I was thinking that I'm more of a warm-up act for the insightful comments that Jonathan's going to make. I really only have one question, and I'm just going to ask it a whole bunch of different ways. So I was sitting here listening, primarily as a historian of medieval Chinese Buddhism, and those were the ears that I put on for these presentations, and so I'm really curious about some obvious parallels or connections or precedents that I thought about as I was listening to these papers. And just really, as you all are the experts on Tzu Chi in particular, on Taiwanese contemporary culture more generally, so you have the answers that I don't have about these influences from the past or ideas or practices from the past. And so where do they survive? I mean, sometimes they survive as practices, but sometimes they survive perhaps as explicit counter-narratives, or perhaps they survive as invisible sources of tension, or maybe they're just unmentionable, or they're silences, right? Where do these remnants of the past, where can we find them? So it's really the same question over and over again, and I'm going to go just in order. So with Professor Lin's paper on pure practitioners, so you specifically mentioned a couple of the precedents, and I agree with this framing of multiple modernities. It's a concept that I've gotten some value out of. But if there are multiple modernities, it can only be because of the different histories that have led to those multiple modernities. So when I was listening to your paper, I was wondering about the many ideas that I've gotten from medieval Buddhist texts about what moral practice does for you. What does rigorous engagement in following the precepts do for you? And according to the texts that I've been reading for 20 years now, that type of morality that you're talking about, that type of self-cultivation that you're talking about, produces numinous, magical, transformative powers. They lead to bodily freedom from illness, but also physical beauty, and also, I was reading a text, I was translating a text recently that was saying that, through this kind of rigorous following of precepts, your clothing will be clean, and you will always look well put together. Your body will be fragrant. You'll have this kind of poise. You will have elegance. You'll have eloquence when you speak. People will feel soothed and calmed, and they'll feel happy. And your words, they will actually listen to you. And they will themselves take your words seriously and become transformed by your words, and then share that with other people. And all of this actually is coming from a text on Jivaka, his donation. So to harken back to Bill's presentation yesterday. So I'm just wondering, I can't help but see some of these pictures of Master Cheng-Yen, and sort of, are these kinds of things at play? Are these kinds of transformative qualities, are they still sort of floating around, and if so, in what ways? And then is that what we mean by charisma, or could it be what we mean by charisma? And the question I had for Li Yuzhan is just, I'm really curious what your definition of charisma is, I guess. How are you defining charisma? The connections that you made in your own paper with earlier biographies of monastics, I'm familiar with the ones from the 6th century, from before the Tang, and that's where we find the first biography of nuns, the Bhikkhuni Zhuan, written in early 6th century. And I looked at that text in contrast to the Gaoseng Zhuan, and I looked at these two, and the way that they depict charisma, if we're going to use that word, is really different. And so my question for you is something about the gendered notion of charisma that these texts are presenting. So I was only looking in terms of medicine because that's what I do. I only have one channel in my brain. And what I noticed was the monks they were always foreign. They were always doing some kind of rituals. They were always chanting dharanis or doing some kind of elaborate, shenzhou, some kind of like elaborate rituals and incantations, commanding demons, right? Discovering secret elixirs that cure disease and so forth. But the nuns did none of that. The nuns did none of that. They were involved in healing, but it was never this kind of powerful miracle healing. It was never commanding demons. It had to do with being pious. It had to do with being charitable. It had to do with being educated, and it had to do with caring for others. So they cared for others with medications, not with spells, not with rituals. So I didn't know what to make of that. I don't know if that's a gendered difference in the 6th century. I imagine it probably is. I'm just wondering about all of those connotations in the present day materials that you look at, and to what extent they are these notions of charisma are gendered. To what extent are they kind of picking up on some of these long-standing themes? So again, different version of the same question for Julie. With you talked about the Han, the early Chinese precedents of the Han funerary customs and so forth. So these go way back, right? These kinds of traditions, and so I wanted to kind of pick up on the histories of those connotations, those practices. This lack of emotionality that you talked about, and that's how you turn a death into a good death. I'm wondering there about in the medieval period, there's a lot of concern with what anthropologists and historians have been calling death pollution. I don't know if that's a term that you have any kind of relationship with, if you have any feelings about or arguments for or against that term. But let me use that term just to ask you, like, are concepts of death pollution relevant in any way in contemporary Taiwan, in Siji communities, and do these emotional practices that you're talking about sort of play a role in neutralizing that? So this is not a historical example, but I was in Thailand. Speaking of multiple modernities, I was in Thailand when at a funeral the family donated the corpse to the monks, not for medical science or for learning, but so that the monks could meditate on the decomposition of the body. And there was an idea that the merit that was generated by the family by doing this donation was very, very, very large amount of merit, and that it far outweighed the fear of ghosts or pollution or anything. But the family, as soon as they started the funeral, as soon as they started the cremation fire, the family ran away. They took off immediately, and it was only the monks that stayed and watched this happening. So there still were these kind of like ideas of ghosts and pollution and so forth. So anyway, I'm just speaking of multiple modernities and different histories. I'm just wondering sort of how any of this might have anything to do with Taiwan. And so none of you need to answer these historical questions today, because I'm just kind of thinking out loud about what I noticed in this panel that's very far outside of my area of expertise. But if you didn't want to answer these history questions, the other whole set of questions that I would want to ask you is comparison with these topics that you moral practices and charisma and death practices and so forth, as they're practiced within Suji. I'm just curious about how that compares with the other huge international Buddhist organizations that are in the world today. So, we have I don't know, things like Wan Buddhism or Soka Gakkai or other organizations in Taiwan, or just, yeah, so just in terms of each of your different topics, just how would they look? What is that comparison? Does it illuminate anything that's in particular interesting about Taiwan as well? So yeah, like I said, it's just one question, lots of versions of the same question, and I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
Later together? Okay, and then thank you. Okay, and then Professor Gold. Ching. It's Professor Gold.
Thank you, Pierce. That was very clever of you to pretend that I was going to outdo you. Really raises the bar here. Thank you very much for offering me again another place to speak to this prestigious and very, very warm audience. Really enjoyed talking with many of you over the last day and a half. So these papers are really wonderful. And one of the things I wanted to just notice about all of them is how intensely engaged they are with contemporary social science and theoretical approaches to the study of culture. And I'm really impressed with what I've learned from all three of you about Tzu Chi through these very profound deployments, I think, of social science theorization and social cultural analysis. So I kind of wanted to emphasize that. So Dr. Lin's paper, to start, provides us a tremendously illuminating key to understanding the adopted life and the moral impact of Tzu Chi lay practitioners, especially the pure practitioners, which are the theme. But I think that just looking at the 10 precepts is already giving us insight into the formation of the self and the ethicization. That's, I think, a theme of this panel. Actually, I guess I could step back and say that I saw a theme of this panel and the last one together, which is really about how can we learn from kind of trying to track the relations between the technologies of the self and self-cultivation and the Tzu Chi Foundation practices and efforts and the social infrastructures that they generate. So there's these, that was the term from the last session, the idea of infrastructure. So I think that what we have actually is a full continuum of self-aware, self-cultivation connected with physical and spatial enactments that make that personal development and world transformation possible. And since it's all very carefully thought through and modified and remodified and adapted to different circumstances very intentionally, I think there's really something to learn at pretty much every node. So that's just to say I see a really interesting set of continuities just by making Tzu Chi the topic for the day. We get a really nice sense of the continuities of how a particular set of intentionalities, a particular set of expectations and desires and hopes and dreams, and all supercharged with the theme of compassion and the Bodhisattva practice, works through from individual mental states all the way to booking airline flights and bringing supplies and on and on. So to go back to Dr. Lin's paper, it seemed to me that she sees, so she's seeing the compassion that Tzu Chi displays publicly as something that's really undergirded by this widely practiced service-based and embodied discipline. And the notion that this role is neither monastic nor properly lay is, I think, a really important and helpful observation, and something that we should kind of continue to think about, just where we're going to place this kind of practice. And so the methodological frame here, she mentions, is, as Pierce just mentioned, to see Tzu Chi as constituting a distinctive Buddhist moral modernity. And this is drawing upon Eisenstadt's famous work on multiple modernities, in which it's argued that different regions and cultures develop different kind of cultural programs. That's kind of his term. In Eisenstadt's work, what makes these diverse movements all modern is that they question and deconstruct previously divinely ordained structures. So they're kind of not divinely ordained structures. They're personal choices. And so the systems are supposed to be, that are elevated in place of tradition, of divinely ordained tradition, are chosen by individual agency. So Eisenstadt actually has this idea of individual agency as kind of another kind of way of structuring modernity. And I think maybe Tzu Chi may be an exception here to Eisenstadt's emphasis on individuality, since, of course, it's centered around service, service and deference that requires compromise. So I wonder if, since Tzu Chi obviously is modern, it seems undeniably modern, it's going to provide us some evidence that we need to rethink, once again, the definition of modernity, at least if you ever had a definition of modernity. Or maybe there's sufficient agency in the pure practitioners even to satisfy Eisenstadt, I don't know. So Dr. Lin ends her abstract by saying that this form of Buddhist modernity is specifically Taiwanese and globally resonant. So I would be interested to hear more about this local and global idea. What about the form of life of pure practitioners strikes you as specifically Taiwanese, and not just coming from Taiwan? And what aspects do you think are expressions of a globalized transnational approach to Buddhist identities? Okay, so those are some questions. And then moving on to Dr. Lee's paper. Dr. Lee shows us the massive importance of writing and publication for the establishment and popularization of Taiwanese Bhikshuni Sanghas. And she uses the methodological framework here of thinking about distinct stages of religious charisma. The stages appeared more in the abstract, I think, than the presentation, but maybe it was there. There was the kind of 3 stages of the early life of the teacher, in which talent and willpower and chosenness are emphasized, and then the founding of the religious order in the narrative, which has kind of a systematization of the founder's thought, the promulgation of purpose, the formation of the brand identity. And then there's the 3rd stage of becoming socially recognized, and recognized as a religious leader specifically, which requires a special kind of new clarity of the message. And so this interesting discussion of charisma is, of course, thinking this notion of religious charisma. It was made famous by Max Weber, who came up also in the previous panel. He spoke about how charisma becomes routinized, that's his term, over time, as an institution gets established. And Weber emphasized that charisma has a revolutionary force, naturally. It changes things. A personal charisma changes things and upsets things. And Dr. Lee makes this astute observation that given the revolutionary character of charisma, the master may need to self-limit and even see a kind of personal disenchantment in order to have the institution take over and become formalized, and then promulgate, that's not an English word, promulgate its distinctive brand with sufficient clarity. Right? So if you want to have a clear message, that's the way I understood the sort of transition as the tradition develops. In order to have a greater and wider appeal, you need to clarify your message, and you need to have a master who's going to stick to message. And so this kind of idea of branding is then again also going to be necessarily connected to the increase in publications. Like, you can't have a lot of contradictions among the publications. And then publication, of course, sets the doctrines and narratives in print. So then you're stuck there. So that stabilizes things. Dr. Lee mentioned that there's an increase in publications as a natural increase in publications as time goes on. But it seems to me that's kind of like, isn't that a tautology? Like, if you're still publishing things, then there's going to be more and more. Stuff sort of stays. So I'm not sure what that exactly means, that there's an increase in publications, but maybe there's an acceleration of publications. Maybe that's the way you put it. You could put it, that would just be the same thing. That would make sense to me, because my brain is thick at this time of day. But if they're all still in print, then you do have this sort of, massive increase in the production of work. Then I was particularly interested in the discourse analysis that comes as another method, the sort of careful tracking of different terms that show up in these different biographies in order to see new themes that show up in the literature. That was very, very interesting. Okay, let me. So then the question is, once you have the sort of tracking of, so the question is kind of, what can you do? Oh dear. Okay. What can you do with all of this, these books? Dr. Lee mentions that books help to attract educated intellectuals to the movement. I was wondering if there's like a different audience for different kinds of, I don't know, for the television broadcasts or for the museum. Is there a different kind of intended audience? That's really a different thing. But I was wondering if you have a sense, Dr. Lee, of, and maybe you could articulate something more about the distinctive brand identities of the different charitable Taiwanese Buddhist organizations. If you see those appearing in the books or in the literature that you're studying, or if it's just a kind of shared understanding that people have, how different do they really need to be? Or is it not that they really need to differentiate from one another, but just that they simply need to stay clearly on message? Okay, and then third, Dr. Lin, I apologize. Oh, sorry, no, not Dr. Lin. Dr. Huang deploys ideas within the ethical turn in anthropology to analyze the way that Tzu Chi's Silent Mentors program has established a new form of end-of-life care in Taiwan. And this practice is one of Tzu Chi's distinctive, unique contributions. And it's quintessential for understanding how Tzu Chi performs this so-called application of Buddhist morality that we've been talking about across its activities. So it's very wonderful to have Professor Huang's insights here. I was particularly taken by this question of the ethicization of death, although I had a question also about, death is an ethical opportunity on its own, and so is it really the case that it wasn't possible to have an ethical experience of in a funeral before this turn? And what exactly is the kind of new affordance that draws people in? I assume what's meant here is that the Silent Mentors program provides an extended period where emotions around death are evoked and given space for expression, and that expands the moral significance of death for the family. If we think of funerary rituals in general as establishing a space of what's called liminality, where the family is articulated as having a kind of relation with a relative that's no longer alive, but also not by any means fully departed from fields of articulable emotional enactments, it would seem that the body-giving bodhisattvas program creates an uncommonly extended period of liminality. So this is a special opportunity for emotional expression, but it might also run the danger of creating anxiety and discomfort as time goes on, since the old world is dissolved, but the new one hasn't yet been established. That's kind of the whole idea of the liminal space in between, in the middle of a ritual. So perhaps this is just how mourning always feels, and this is just an acknowledgement of it to a certain degree. But I wonder if you noticed this kind of difficulty among families and wanting to get back to ordinary life, perhaps. And I wonder, on the other hand, if there's anything that Tzu Chi institutional agents or advocates have done or are trying to do to mitigate those kinds of difficulties arising during this long transitional period. So those were my thoughts. Thank you for this great panel.
Oh, thank you, Professor Gold. Well, let's see. We have some time, what, 4:05? Or so we have, gosh, around 15 minutes to, unless, I don't even know. How long should it's right now, right? What time is it now? 12 minutes, okay. 12 minutes for our responses. The bell. For whom the bell tolls. How would you, one by one, or, okay.
I will pick up questions. Okay, I think the status of monks, Chinese monks, is related to the authority of sutras, because Chinese Buddhists have to make decisions according to authorship or content or any standards. This sutra is true, not apocrypha. So you see those great monks, they are all translators. Okay, and for women, because our order for bhikkhuni is established very late. Okay, so we don't have a foreign nuns. Okay, so women, especially those important educated nuns, are related to apocrypha. They were invited by the gods to heaven to learn and wake up in the morning and come back to the palace to teach Wu Zhe Tian about sutras, knowledges, these kind of things. So, so I think that's why you see those many famous monks are foreigner, translator, are very educated, this kind of stuff. And the second thing is about okay, I don't want to say how old I am. But I have a chance to read different versions of the biographies of Venerable Zheng Yan. And I can tell the difference. They are changing things. And I think this is a very unique case. Let's see how long so many versions of religious leaders. And you can see in a short term, not short term, like 66 decades, foundation has been such a great one. And you can see the address, local address for the Zheng Yan is the 农场师傅, is the 弱女子. And then you to the 师公, the 众人之母. And you can see and also the people in Hualien, people in Taipei, they will invent different names for her. And this all, this curiosity, and also think about the religious environment, the religious market. They are very, very important slogan, brand, to show her capabilities. Her influence is not limited in Hualien. You know, from the beginning, it got like disciples from Taipei. okay, and they are well educated. They come from very good families, these kind of things, and I think people may say, especially feminist study, will say religions will change, will promote women's status. Okay, but according to my observation, those important nouns, or the first group of, okay, to be a successful master, you have to have the second generation, very capable nuns. They should come from very privileged families. They got a religious backgrounds. They are local gentries. They have a special suffering experience, these kind of things. Legendary around them. Not education, but this special group of women, they cooperated with each other to create a new religious movement, something like this. And I think Venerable Zheng Yan has done this very successfully. Especially the way she speaks, the way she tells you the story in Minanyu. That's the first time I contacted her story. It's so touchable, you know. And then she learned the Mandarin, and now maybe she needs to speak a little bit English or something. You can see her change. Okay, so when you say charisma, I'm not to define the content of charisma. I'm trying to defend when will you need this kind of charisma to establish a brand, to establish your personal, the first stage, yeah, these kind of things. And including how, I interviewed Tzu Ji's female volunteers. They say, the reason I become a good volunteer because I'm so like Venerable Zheng Yan, because I'm gentle, very 女子, very soft, very these kind of things. It kind of built up a certain role of housewives or even the grandmas at the family. That's why her disciple will continue to, not the first generation, something like that. So I think this is a wonderful case, and I will follow your suggestion to do more research on this.
Should we respond, or do you want to open the floor?
Oh, please respond.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the great questions. I really appreciate those. Professor Sagaro's question about your description about about the consequence of very good self-cultivation. It reminds me of the like the monks' biographies, those stories there, right? So I guess we can find parallel text in nowadays, like modern day Tzu Ji. So in their regular meetings for the volunteers, they do share their experience about, after upholding the 10 precepts, what changes they have, but perhaps not so dramatic. They don't really have like fragrance or clothes, clean clothes, or eloquence or fragrance. Elegance. Yeah. Perhaps they don't describe in that way, but I think this is a modern parallel. So, but that's very interesting. I can continue to. Your questions gave me new ideas about future questions for future interviews. Yeah, I can ask them. How do you feel about upholding the precepts? So yeah, thank you. And then about the, I can only answer one question for each of you, but there's a lot to think about. So the question about what is specifically Taiwanese, I couldn't answer this very right away, perhaps because I'm Taiwanese. So I don't really know, what makes Taiwanese. But I had this kind of description because when I interviewed those pure practitioners from Malaysia especially, and also one from America, I would ask him, do you feel Tzu Ji is very global, very international, or very Taiwanese? And all of them told me it's very Taiwanese. But then I didn't continue. I didn't ask him, why do you think so? Yeah. So yeah, so that's very interesting. I want to continue to. And then about this, thank you for making the distinction, the theoretical distinction. I mean, it is very important for me to, it would even excite me to think if Ciji is an exception, yeah, in the multiple modernities model. So that would be great for, to say, yeah, that would be a very good direction to develop the theoretical framework for my future when I'm still writing. I mean, it's an ongoing project, so I can still revise it. Thank you.
Just try it. I think it might be on.
Yes, thank you. Hi, thank you so much, for your questions. You're really amazing. Without reading paper, you can ask like precisely on top, Okay, first question is about the, so medieval period. Actually, the very first time I presented this work was, I got the references about, Liz Wilson's book on the charming cadavers. Yeah. So in Indian Buddhism, early Indian Buddhism, there's this tradition, and part of the, what do you call, in Thailand, you call this the kind of, well, I mean, it's very difficult. And so I thank you, I didn't know, still practicing, yeah. And another tradition before, so that I could relate it to, is a practice of, so the production and worship of mummies, especially this include whole body relics found predominantly in China, Taiwan, Vietnam, and the ungilded mummies of Japan, Tibet, Mongolia, and Thailand, according to Douglas Gilder or Marcus Bingenheimer. And I think, Justin, you also have a paper on this, so we have a specialist here. And so I compare to them, and they are different, because they do not just meditate on it, they actually try to preserve it. And even after the dissection, they will suture it to whole, and put on the clothing, and then making sure it come back to intact. So that's one part. It's a different. It does not meditate on the cadavers. So that's your question. Okay. And compared to, is it for me, Soka Gakkai, Won Buddhism? I don't know. I forgot what was it for.
I think it was what specifically Taiwanese about.
No.
Very proud of you, yeah. Maybe comparison with non-Taiwanese organizations.
Well, I think Soka Gakkai, because they actually eventually separated the original leader and become spiritual leaders, and then the faith-based organization. So I think Tzu Chi is resisting this trend, not becoming separated. And on top of everything, well, for Weber, basically he sees charisma doesn't, it's incompatible with economy, right? And so, but we can see Tzu Chi, how Tzu Chi will run with the biggest, well endowed, and everything accounting is open on the website. So from the beginning, I mean, I was also old enough. I've seen the blackboard inside the Jing She. They use the chalk, on the board to write down the revenue and to show everyone. That was the early Tzu Chi's momentum, is the transparency of accounting. So they do it compatible with the economy, and so that one part, I think not yet. And another thing is Tzu Chi is non-political, so that's one of the lay precepts. So Soka Gakkai as a party. But this question always come up, Tzu Chi versus Soka Gakkai. And thank you for your question about the liminality and pollution, and then the application of Buddhist morality. But one thing is that in this practice of a silent mentor, karma never comes around. This term never comes around. Whereas in Tzu Chi, always, all the time, like early sociology study, or people still refer to Tzu Chi as Tzu Chi Gongde Hui, marriage society. It's like people associate Tzu Chi with merit, the concept of karma all the time, but never comes around with this practice of a silent mentor. I think they wanted to strictly keeping it in the medical. I didn't talk much about this, but in the medical science or medical care in Tzu Chi history has its own context. Because its first momentum is by mobilizing for the first general hospital, and also in Zheng Yan's hagiography, that it's always the critical moment is always associated with the sickness and illness, and how she overcome and all this. So it's I want to say medical science. I said in another paper in Tzu Chi has sacramental meanings. It's not just a science. It's not scientism, but it has to do with how the whole Tzu Chi build up the momentum, and also has also associated with Taiwan history, especially under Japanese period, because under Japanese period that's when the modern medical science was imported, and also they allow Taiwanese to go to medical school. And even this, the commemoration for donor also started by Japanese, but not in Taiwan, in Beijing, no, actually. Okay, so that was, sorry, the death was, thank you so much, that it's a critical moment. What's new about this affordance? Well, actually, originally I was following James Laylaw's. He has this article about the telo, right? In Jainism, they would die, just slowly stop eating until you die, and that is the best way. So, well, he didn't answer this question at the end of his paper. He just said, it's an ethical question. You can live a whole life, and then you die a certain way, and then your whole life is rewritten. That's why I call it moral career of the dead body. That it's another career, and then I actually heard people say that, because while they were waiting, and then people asked them, so where, sort of, either they were waiting to just say, well, he's just, if people ask, where is your father, just say, oh, he's working in Hualien. They just literally use working. He's working in Hualien, or they're waiting, they're in training to become a teacher. So that's because for the grass anatomy, I don't know about now, I didn't update every day, it used to be 60 years waiting. So that's very long liminality. Yeah, and so that's also, I don't know, that's my guess. That's one of the reasons why the simulation center is open. And in terms of pollution, that's one thing, usually, like in most of the literature talk about, this is against including Ian Johnson, this is against the morality of keeping the body intact. But this is a concept sort of 全师, and I asked so many people, including Pan Rongbang, he also said, no, most family he interviewed didn't. And so I finally found it. It has to do with the historian Timothy Brook, his book about his concept of somatic integrity, about the 灵池, about the, I related to it. So it has to do with morality. It's not pollution. It's moral. It's the criminal. The hardest punishment is, making just, just making their body not intact. So even beheaded is too light. They have to pull it 5 parts, or like his book called Death by 1,000 Steps, or 1,000 Cuts, all right? And so that was the part. And also in Taoism, there's something called 练度. So there is this practice of putting an organ back, like, uterus or something, like just, like ritually. So that's Taoism, because Taoism doesn't have reincarnation, right? And then they just become 仙人. And so it's a difference, but not in Buddhism, not in, it is about morality. So the whole field, the whole domain is to stay with the morality in this practice. And pollution, I don't know, not so much, but it's more like, I do know because, during the initiation, they have this commencement for opening for use. And it is inside this center in the lab, or it's a surgery room, but it's actually 8 teachers. So many families, they were shocked that they thought they were going to see their family for the last time, but they didn't expect to be with 8 dead bodies, all the other 7 dead bodies. So if it's your family, it's okay, but others, and so that was the concern I've heard before, but not so much about pollution and the liminal period. That was one thing, I really found. That's my my argument is silent mental actually doesn't go against the Chinese funeral. Many families, they actually do it parallel. They have other practice, smaller practice, and then they also take the incense, the ashes from Tzu Chi and back. So everything is stay the same, and even make it even better. Actually, because Tzu Chi is, if you can see online on YouTube everywhere that it's amazing, just solemn, it's spectacular. So I don't think it's anything sort of against traditional, but they make the core value even desirable. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've certainly learned a lot this afternoon. I want to thanks again. I know I've learned a lot this afternoon, the whole day, and let's give a hearty thanks, round of applause to our paper present and our commentators. Thank you, thank you. All right, so let's have some coffee.
Thank you so much for the very interesting discussions and presentations. So I'd like to invite everyone to step forward, and we'll take a photo, and we also have the director of Tzu Chi Boston Service Center, Su Fang Deng, to present the gifts. And we'll have a 20-minute break, so everyone please be back by 4:25. Thank you. Okay, welcome back everyone, and I'm glad our entire panel is seated and prepared. So we now move into our final session of the day, a roundtable on the future of Buddhism. We are honored to welcome Professor Mayfair Yang from the Department of Religious Studies and East Asian Languages and Cultural Studies from UC Santa Barbara to moderate this discussion. So Professor Yang, please.
Is it on? Okay, welcome everybody to an afternoon panel on the future of Buddhism. This is a very big topic, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what everybody has to say. And we've heard about Buddhism and medicine, Buddhism and infrastructure, Buddhism and environment, charity, United Nations, psychology, and politics. Okay, so we're going to slightly change the order and also add one extra person to our distinguished panel. So we will start out with Professor Jonathan Gold, and then we will move to Professor Deng Wei-ren, and then Julia Huang, and followed by Sun Yinggang and William McGrath, and also Jacob Lindsay, who is at the, everyone else's institutional affiliation is the same, but Jacob Lindsay is Oregon State Contemplative Studies Initiative at the International Society for Contemplative Research.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so I'm Jonathan Gold. Thank you so much for giving me again this opportunity to speak with all of you. Thank you, Dr. Herr, for these days, and thanks to all the organizers. So the future of Buddhism is a very big topic. I am going to ask, from my perspective, what capacities Buddhism might uniquely contribute under contemporary conditions. I'm assuming that that's kind of the question. And one thing I wanted to pick up, it's good that Professor Tung is next to me. I wanted to pick up on your point, asking Dr. Herr earlier about the Venerable Tsang Yen's approach to the transformation of consciousness, whether, this is full enlightenment. And what I want to say is that I think it's clear that we don't need full liberative transformation. We don't need the path of seeing even to have a moral psychological benefit from Buddhist practices or from applying Buddhist concepts and practices to our lives, to social systems, to understanding, to our understanding. So I'm interested in using Buddhist concepts to advance social thought and to try and intervene in a fruitful way, and to do that even though I don't expect I'll ever have an attainment that transforms my consciousness in any way that is listed as a path in pre-modern scripture. So just to articulate a little bit once more some of the conceptual frames through which I'm thinking that this could be of benefit. If we think of dependent origination, reframing social and political problems, it's not the product of isolated individual or single causes, right? That is, social phenomena are dynamically conditioned systems in which perceptions and intuitions and incentives and even historical trends are continually shaping one another. And this way of thinking encourages us to seek out a better understanding of the past, a better understanding of social systems, thinking we should promote causal literacy. Maybe that's a term we could start thinking about, or karmic literacy, because I'm talking about these causes as valenced by our defiled mental states too often. So rather than blame-centered thinking, we think, what brought this situation to pass, not who is the person who did this. And that seems to me very much in line with a characterization of a bodhisattva as well. We would want a bodhisattva not to be blaming, but to be trying to understand the causes and how to intervene in those causes. Non-attachment to views, I've mentioned, doesn't require us to abandon convictions, but it loosens our compulsion to treat our own interpretive frameworks as absolute or complete or identical with moral worth. We might have a particular perspective. We do. We inevitably have a particular perspective, and we should be tapping into our own values and our own understandings, but we should always preserve the possibility of learning under conditions of disagreement and change. We shouldn't always be seeking to just convince the other person. We should be seeking to compromise and to see beyond bifurcations and divisions and move forward in a productive way that allows everyone to continue together. Karma, I like to think of as feedback systems. So karma is not just you do something and then later on something happens, but thinking in terms of feedback systems shifts karma away from being something like a reward or a punishment, and instead thinking about our actions within historically extended causal patterns of accumulation. So repeated actions shape habits, they shape our expectations, they shape our intuitions, and then eventually they accumulate into environments, institutions, patterns, and habits that in turn condition the future actions of people who inhabit those environments. Sometimes those are ourselves returning to those same environments, and sometimes we set up a situation for someone else to have a certain type of expectation. So harmful patterns become socially self-reinforcing unless we interrupt them. And that's a karmic loop. So I try to prescribe this. I talked about, when I was talking about the Bodhisattva Path, as being effectively about being committed to not sticking, to not locking in. One way I talk about this is just the value of optionality, just to acknowledge in all cases that we preserve revisability, both within ourselves and within our institutions. And we work toward having the capacity to change course without humiliation, right? So if you, so often we think, well, if somebody changes their mind, they must have, what a fool they are, you can't trust them. But actually, if we have a situation where people are able to change their minds without being humiliated by that, they change their minds because they saw the evidence and they can share that evidence. That's actually an advantage to everyone. Repeated action, we don't want a system to collapse under the possibility of change. That is, if we have competing systems and one of them changes, does that mean we have to go completely over to the other system? So politically, this means building systems that can adapt without demanding rigid identity commitments or permanent antagonisms. And then I just want to bring in, for the last point, because I'm sure I'm going to run out of time, the idea of how right now we're so captured by our devices, and I think that we need attentional retraining that recognizes that all of our perceptions are cultivated and they're not neutral. And Buddhist practices of mindfulness and analytical reflection, I think, really do a good job to widen our awareness beyond our most reactive, immediate fixation. They can do that, and we should be focused on that as just a major selling point for those practices, to be able to train us to have the ability to move out of the immediate reaction. That's a key, to me, an absolutely key Buddhist moral contribution to the future. So being able to move beyond reactive fixation, allowing people to notice their own emotional conditioning, to notice when they're being captured, to notice their habitual projections, and to notice when their experience is being narrowed and drawn in without their consent or without their knowledge. To me, the future of Buddhism depends less on whether people identify as Buddhists than on whether Buddhist methods for resisting reification and compulsive certainty can remain culturally available and can be made more widely available. Thank you.
Oh, my Buddha. I think you have spelled out what I have in mind. So I'll probably say the same thing, differently. Before I offer my thought, let me first ask what kind of question we have actually been invited to ponder over the future of Buddhism. Sounds like a single question, but I suspect it conceals at least three. In Sanskrit grammar, the future participle from the root pu, to be, to become, branches in several directions. Bhavishyat gives us the simple future, what will be. Bhavitavya, gerundive, carries a strong moral weight, what is to be, what should be. And bhavaniya, also a gerundive, lends to what is worthy of being brought about. So when we speak of the future of Buddhism, we may be asking at once what Buddhism will be, or what Buddhism should be, and what Buddhism deserves to be cultivated. They are very different questions, and I noticed that whenever this topic come up, our conversation tends to slide between them without quite knowing it. I would say at the outset that I do not think any of us in a position to speak for Buddhism's future. None of us has that standing. And the temptation to do so, if I may borrow some Yogacara vocabulary, would land us squarely in Parikalpita Swabhava, the imagined nature. In Chinese, 偏见所指, the fabrication of a single reified Buddhism that we then take to be inherently real, when in fact it is our own construction. Jonathan Gold, echoing what you yesterday, remind us beautifully of the danger of exactly this kind of reification on the Bodhisattva path. I think the same caution applies here. What we might do more modestly and more usefully is to ask after the conditions. The second nature, Paratantra Swabhava, the dependently arisen nature, in Chinese, 依他起性, under which plural healthy Buddhisms might mature. Not Buddhism, singular and reified, but Buddhisms in the plural, each shaped by its own historical and cultural conditions, each capable of promoting the welfare of beings and of the natural and social environments in which those beings dwell. That is my first reframing. My second thought in this, to venture into the future, we are not required to bid farewell to the past, or rather, and this is more precise, even when we do bid farewell, the French phrase au revoir reminds us that the proper farewell is to the reviewing, to the seeing again, not adieu, not the final parting, but au revoir, the farewell that anticipates return. I find myself reaching for the Buddhist term that themselves along, Buddhist terms that travels along the path, anusmriti in Chinese, 随念, as in Buddha or Dharma anusmriti, 佛随念或是法随念, recollection, reviewing, that careful and attentive remembering of tradition together with its conditions. the future of Buddhism, if it is to have any depth, is not built by repudiating tradition, but by rereading it. In my in our roundtable yesterday, Professor Salguero made a remark that has stayed with me, that Buddhism has always been applied Buddhism. Engaged Buddhism, humanistic Buddhism, applied Buddhism. These are not modern inventions. They are recoveries of something already constitutive of the tradition. I think that is exactly right, and I want to anchor the point philologically. If we turn to the very opening chapter of the Asra Sahasrika Prajnaparamita Sutra, the 8000颂般若经, Buddha instructs Subhutis to teach how Bodhisattvas should train themselves, Shikshitavyam, and engage in practice yogam atavyam, in the perfection of wisdom. Both of these verbs are gerundives, the same tavya from a form as Bodhisattva we just mentioned. The text is articulated from its opening lines in the model voice of what is to be done. The perfection of wisdom, the perfection of wisdom, to borrow a phrase that Pierre Adot used in another tradition, is not a doctrine to be contemplated, but a manière de vivre, a way of life. It is to be practiced, applied, carried out in the body. The Bodhisattva Charity in Prajnaparamita, she moves through, conducts herself in the perfection of wisdom. And if we read Asra Sahasrika along with the Vajracchedika, the Jinggang Jin, the picture sharpens further. Wisdom, prajna, and its application, upaya, dana, all the perfections are not two things to be breached. One theoretical and one practical, not. They are constitutive of each other, wherever the five skandhas are involved. That is, wherever there is a being acting in the world, the perfection of wisdom is to be applied. So when contemporary Buddhists speak of engaged or applied Buddhism, they are on a sufficiently anusmriti disciplined reading, neither merely innovating nor merely repeating. They are continuing, extending the tradition's own dynamic into new conditions. The Mahayana's own teaching of dependent origination would not allow us to say more than this, and would certainly not allow us to demand faithfulness to some fixed essence, since the tradition itself denies that any such essence exists. The proper question is therefore not whether contemporary engaged Buddhism is faithful to an original Buddhism. Yes, I do think so. So my earlier remarks as a commentator was misheard, I guess. But whether it stands in living continuity with the tradition's resources, recognizably of the tradition rather than merely about it. And here I think Buddhist scholars have an opportunity analogous to the one Adot opens in his reading ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, to recover. And now I use the word in its weaker, lesser essentialist sense. The Mahayana, not as a system of propositions to be ascended to, but as a way, marga, to be walked and walked forward. So my two thoughts taken together point towards this rather than predicting Buddhism's future or prescribing it. We may cultivate the condition in which plural Buddhisms can mature in genuine continuity with what tradition has always been. What conditions are those? Just let me name only the most general categories and leave the specifics to better minds and to time. There are epistemological conditions, scholarship rigorous enough that Buddhist tradition can speak in its own voice rather than being ventriloquized through ours. There are affective and communal conditions, communities in which disagreement can be held without rupture, and in which karuna and prajna are cultivated together rather than at each other's expense. And there are institutional conditions, forms of monastic, lay, and academic life adequate to the contemporary world without being colonized by it. Each of these is a question for ongoing inquiry, not a program for declaration. I want to close this with one observation about what we have actually been doing here these 2 days. We have read Lotus Sutra alongside Master Zheng Yan. We have read Madhyamaka alongside humanitarian relief. We have read Yogacara alongside the lived practice of volunteers. This itself, it seems to me, is a Anusmriti Shui Nian in action. Reviewing of tradition in the light of present conditions, neither freezing the past nor discarding it. If the future of Buddhism is anything we can speak about with any confidence at all, perhaps it's just this: a future built by people who are willing to remember the tradition carefully and courageously enough. The Bodhisattva, a feel-good man, quoting not here, that it can, in turn, speak into the present. That, at least, is what I have learned from these 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me in this important panel. I'm sorry I came late because I had to finish teaching, and so I missed most of the panels. But from what I heard today, and also I'm just gonna share with you some of my reflection. Today, we have from philosophy and then to the very wide range of way of engaging Tzu Chi and Buddhism with the modernity, and to the previous panel just happened on charisma and a new pure practitioner and its effect, its impact on medical science. So I think the future of Buddhism is really bright, but let me share with you some of my thoughts. First, first is from I study culture, globalization and culture. And from my study of globalization, that especially globalization of certain food, okay, it might not be a very fair comparison, but there are two kind of a way to make something, to make a food globalize. One is an institutional approach. So you go with like the McDonald's, you have a whole package, a whole institution, you move there and then you follow exactly the same menu and the same company and same logo. And in religion, it's like a Vatican, the Catholicism. So you have a whole institution, you move there, and then you keep missionizing and spreading. And the other approach is by being invisible, actually. Just like a blending approach. It's in terms of food, is like kimchi or sriracha sauce is everywhere, and you don't even know it's added, or soy sauce. You don't even know where it's in it, but it's everywhere. And so that's one way of blending into everything. And like a Pentecostal church, and you have a certain package, it can be portable. Going around the world, not necessarily from the center, but definitely in the south. So these two-way approaches can go against each other, especially if you work with a legal framework. Now you wanna go with a certain logo, and then you will keep yourself in the institution, and you don't want to be blended into other things. But I think these are two ways for us to think about how Buddhism works, both as an institution, like a really powerful global internationalized organizations such as Soka Gakkai, Tzu Chi, and Won Buddhism. And so this is one approach. The other approach is to become a package, a way of life, and adapt to every culture and society and different time and generations, and becoming indispensable. And the second part, so this leads to my second part, is my study of civil society, of social capital, of spiritual capital, like how people connected. Like this morning we heard about Robert Putnam too. And so, I mean, there's one research by Caroline Chen. I think she's now based in UC Berkeley. And she compared two Taiwanese religious organizations in California. One is Christianity, one is a Christian church, the other one is a Buddhist organization. Well, she's a sociologist, so she changed the term, but we can all guess which group they are. But anyway, the point is the Christian church, Taiwanese Christian church, becoming smaller and smaller. And whereas the new, actually latecomer of a Taiwanese Buddhist organization it's just expanding more and more and more. And she asked why, because most Taiwanese come to the U.S. want to become American and then join Christian church. And then her answer is it depends on where the religiosity lies. And for the Christian church, and their religiosity lies in proselytizing. So depends on proselytizing. When you proselytize, especially as an immigrant, you need to rely on your existing network, and that's your family, friends. And so you can only reach a certain limit when everyone around you converted, and then you run into war. You can't expand anymore. Whereas the Buddhist church is more like what I call facilitator. There's no certain way. You don't have to come to temple to practice Buddhism. You can adapt, keep that training or keep it in mind. You can practice at home. You can practice when you walk. You can practice when you work. And it becomes more and more perpetuating. So these are like two ways we also think about how future of Buddhism can be, like whether the religiosity lie. So to make this, sort of my conclusion, I can't really say conclusion is, I think it's a Stanley Tambaya here at Harvard, and in one of his books he talked about Buddhism is not necessarily, I don't think he called it a religion, and he says the term Western people come to call a combination of civilization, but I don't know exactly the term, but I don't remember exactly the term. But what I find usually, because I'm probably the only sociologist here, with social science, and is Buddhism not necessarily fit in what sociologists of religion, what they use for conversion. Because a lot of time Buddhism can be a way of life, a set of guidance to help people being awakened, how to live in this world and carry out, the life in this world. And so I think in this sense that I think the future of Buddhism is because it's bright, is because it's organic. It can adapt to different culture, different society without set limits on itself, like making its network or its people become thicker, and the network becomes thicker and thicker, and that's smaller and smaller. And it not only adapt to different culture, time, generation, it also change culture and time. And such as we can see Tzu Chi, one of the things, example about Tzu Chi is, I find is, instead of being secularized, Tzu Chi actually more and more sacralized, making more and more originally secular practice, such as recycling garbage for resources, which is extremely secular practice, such as donating body to medical school, which is also secular, but Tzu Chi could make it a religious practice. You do this, you recycle garbage, you can be a bodhisattva. And so I believe it's Buddhism, the future of Buddhism, that it carries on.
The future of Buddhism is a broad topic, but it's really a good question. Actually, today we all confronted with this profound and urgent question. In this turbulent area of collapsing globalization and the rise of fundamentalist ideologies, how can Buddhism play indispensable roles as the crossroad of human civilizations? I'm a historian. I try to share some points or suggestions as a historian. 就今天我们共同面对一个深刻而紧迫的课题，就是在全球化崩盘、文明冲突加剧、原教旨主义思想复兴的这样的时代，佛教如何在人类文明的十字路口扮演不可或缺的角色？The first and foremost, I think, re-intellectualization is very important. We must directly face the shared predicaments of humanity and propose new value frameworks. When the world is trapped in conflicts and fragmentation, Buddhism shall take common goodness. I really like this word, the 共善, the common goodness, as its foundation, advocating the fundamental interdependence of different civilizations and ethnic groups. It should use harmonious unity as its method of break the cycles of opposition and hate, and compassion, as the translation is not perfect, and compassion as its driving force to transcend narrow self-interest and ethnocentrism. This is a profound response to the dilemma of contemporary civilization. We need to contrast in modern language and logic a value system capable of guiding humanity away from zero-sum games and toward coexistence and shared flourishing. 就是佛教的复兴呢，我认为第一个重要的词是在思想化或者是在学术化。我们必须提出新的价值论述。当世界陷入冲突与撕裂，佛教应该以共善为基石，倡导不同文明、不同族群的相互相依，以和合为方法，化解对立与仇恨的循环，以慈悲为动力，超越狭隘的自我与族群中心。这个不仅是古老智慧的重复，更是对当代文明困境的深层回应。我们需要用现代的这个语言和逻辑，构建一套能够引领人类走出零和博弈，走向共生共荣的价值体系。Secondly, I think Buddhism needs repopularization. The vitality of any religion is always rooted in its deep concern for the suffering of living beings. People today face a medical uncertainty, fear of death, pollution, widespread mental exhaustion. Buddhism cannot retreat to the mountains and the forests. It must courageously step into hospitals, communities, nursing homes, and spiritual wastelands. We can develop hospice care so that every being can experience dignity and warmth at the end of life. We can engage in public interest medicine and charity relief, practicing the Bodhisattva way wherever help is most needed. And through mindfulness meditation and spiritual healing, we can provide a method for anxious modern people to settle body and mind. Only when the Dharma truly integrates into people's daily necessities and the universal realities of birth. Thank you. Aging, sickness, and death, can Buddhism once again become an indispensable warm force in society? This is my second point. I think 佛教需要再民众化，就宗教的生命力有时候是在宗教信仰之外，它需要植根于对于众生苦难的深切的关怀，对普通民众生活的介入，就是现在我们面临的这个精神的压力，对社会的忧虑，这个临终的关怀，精神的内耗以及这个空心症之类，佛教不能退守山林，而且也应该勇敢地走进社区、医院、养老院，然后让生命呢，就是在佛教的佛光的照耀之下，能够找到尊严和温暖，就是通过正念禅修、心灵疗愈，为焦虑的现代人类提供安顿身心的法门。我想这是佛教，从历史上看，佛教之所以得到发展和繁荣，很多时候它的这个很重要的原因不在于跟信仰有关系，但很重要的一点就是它的社会影响力，在唐代也是如此，佛教的黄金时代。Finally, Buddhism needs internationalization. As nationalism and the clash of civilization, the conflicts between different civilizations become a very common phenomenon today. Born in the East, Buddhism transcends all regions. It respects difference where point directly to equality. We must boldly go global, using Buddhism's wisdom of selflessness to dissolve extreme identity politics, the principle of equality to confront discrimination and exclusion, and the practice of peace to resolve conflicts and hate. On international forums, in refugee aid and in post-conflict reconciliation, Buddhism must raise a clear and resolute voice, proving that people of different civilizations and beliefs can act on the basis of shared compassion and can join hands across historical grievances. 这是第三个，我认为佛教需要再国际化，因为佛教最初就是一个世界宗教，就是现在民族主义、文明冲突非常严重，佛教呢，应该起到桥梁的作用。虽然诞生于东方，它是超越地域的，它尊重差异，强调众生平等，强调无我，这些呢，都对于这个消除政治的对抗，这个民族主义、化解冲突都有非常重要的这个意义。Okay. So, dear friends, the revival of Buddhism is not only about the flourishing or decline of temple incense, not the increase or decrease of followers. It's about the height of thought, the depth of care, and the breadth of vision. In the chaos of global disintegration, let us rebuild trust through the common good, repair rifts through harmonious unity, and illuminate the path forward through compassion. May Buddhism soon become a true refuge for all beings of this area. With gratitude to everyone. Thank you.
Maybe I'll stand up. How does that sound? Okay. And you guys can stand up too if you want. Some of you are tired. 辛苦了。从台湾过来的，从亚洲过来的朋友们， 兄弟姐妹们、老师们、教授们，辛苦了。I'll speak in English. I didn't prepare anything in Chinese. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to the panel. I have the privileged position of going toward the end, so I can just think about all the interesting things my colleagues have already said. I love the suggestions, and I have something maybe slightly different. Rather than think what should we do to ensure the success of Buddhism in the future, I'll just tell a few stories about Buddhist scriptures and what they have said about the future. One thing we might ask, similar to what Dr. Sun was suggesting, and really many of us were suggesting, is how do we think about the future? How do people generally think about the future now? If you're like me, you're thinking about various emails you need to send or papers you need to grade and this sort of thing. The future is a holder of tasks. It's otherwise more or less open. It's somewhat frightening because who knows what it might bring. There's a certain anxiety about the future, but it's not very precise, and it's sort of something I just try not to think about, to be totally honest. I just wrote a book about pandemics. Yesterday I shared a different sort of project thinking about religion and medicine and their various relationships. But I've been obsessing about pandemics ever since our pandemic and somewhat before that and a lot since that. And it actually, I think, is quite instructive for thinking about time and the way that pandemics qualify time. I'm sure you remember the phrase, in these unprecedented times, right? And time itself felt somewhat heavy. I know it's sort of a strange idea, but I don't think I need to describe it for you because I imagine most of you remember what time felt like, what the future felt like when we were living through a pandemic. Why do I mention that here? Other than the future, is actually Buddhist scriptures have a lot to say about pandemics and the future. My colleague, Dr. Tung, mentioned Jan Nadier and her Few Good Men book. I'm going to mention another one of her books, Once Upon a Future Time. It's a wonderful book for thinking about Buddhist descriptions of time. And it's really a focus on a scripture called the Chandragarbha Sutra. I translate this as the Sutra of Moon Essence. I don't have the Chinese here. What is it? Huang. Okay. And so it's in Tibetan, it's in Chinese. I think there are various other languages too. I can give you those details if you're interested about it. But part of this Chandragarbha Sutra was found at Dunhuang, written in Tibetan. Again, that's the language I'm most familiar with for Buddhist scriptures. And in the Tibetan edition of this scripture is handwritten and stored at the Dunhuang cave. There's a description of the next 2,000 years after the death of the Buddha. And he makes a prediction. The Chandragarbha is the name of a bodhisattva who asks him about the future. And he says, the true Buddha Dharma, the Sad Dharma, right, the Zhengfa will last for 2,000 more years. I'm sure many of you already know this sort of story, so I won't go into too much detail. But the idea is the last 500 of those 2,000 years, things will get bad, unfortunately. The protectors of the Dharma will disappear. Diseases will arise. This is what caught my attention, actually, reading these scriptures. Eventually, even monks will not practice the true Dharma. They'll try to make profit, and obscuring deities will arise, and there'll be no distinguishing between virtue and vice, and kings will steal from the monastic community, from the Buddhist communities, and basically destroy Buddhist institutions, leading to natural disasters and further outbreaks of disease. Again, that was my interest that I was looking for. And maybe you all know this story ends with the disappearance of Buddhism at Kaushambi. right, at Kaushambi in India. So it's a very interesting story, somewhat frightening, and again, if we think about the future of Buddhism, not not so optimistic, is it, right? It's really, it's a reflection on the impermanence of the Buddhist order, right? The impermanence of the Buddhist community composed of people, the Buddhist scriptures that are, of course, embodied by those people, all of it will disappear, according to this particular prediction. I mentioned this was found at Dunhuang. It's not only in Dunhuang, it's many other places, but I bring it up because IOL TIB J 601.1 is connected to IL TIB J 601.2, which I translate as the prophecy of the Khotanese Arhat. And this is actually a related text that put together in Dunhuang, which is telling. It was also translated into Chinese. Do I have the title here? Yeah, I have it at the top. 释迦牟尼如来相法灭尽之际. So this is Paleo Qinhua 2139. This was also written in Chinese at Dunhuang, so popular enough to be translated from Tibetan into Chinese, I think. I don't have a dog in the fight of whether it went one way or the other, but I think that's true. Yeah, actually, no, I remember doing this research. It's Chudrup did it, Fatong, and I think it did go Tibetan to Chinese, which is kind of interesting. So anyways, just that is sort of interesting, and it's another prediction. We have a Khotanese Arhat, Drachomba Gindimpe, Samgavardhana, and he also predicts the disappearance of Buddhism. Very similar sort of program. The kings are named. He talks about various entities that were present in Asia during this time in the 8th and 9th centuries. And again, it's a story of the monks disappearing in Kaushambi. It's a very interesting story. Again, Jan Nadia has a wonderful study of both these texts. And then finally, I'll give you one more, because I know my time is short. It's called The Religious History of Khotan. This is a unique text. The other two are not unique. This is only found at Dunhuang. Liyu Chugi, Chugi Loju. So Khotan in Chinese these days is called Hetian. It's in Xinjiang. In the old days it was called Yutian, and in Tibetan it's called Liyu. And as you may know, Buddhism did disappear from Khotan. So it makes these stories a bit more crushing when we read them in this way. In any case, in this religious history of Khotan, rather than a prophecy, it transforms to the past tense, actually. And so it's a very similar story. Some scholars have read it as straightforward history, because it calls itself a logyu, which is effectively, it's a complicated word, but it basically means history. But if you read it together with these other sources, it has this complex prophetic component to it, where are we hearing the Buddha from the past speaking about the future, or some other version of time, but this is more retrospective. And in this scripture, we also get this nice line that I'll read for you. It's attributed to a master Morgadeshi, which Nadia and others say in Sanskrit is Marga Upadeshika, so it's a Khotanese teacher. And this is what he tells us, is in the lands in which enemies, strife, illness, disease, bad harvests, and so forth arise, one should recite the White Lotus Sutra of the True Doctrine. And another sutra called the Questions of Vimalaprabha, also very interesting text, only extant in Tibetan. And then 108 essential spells and other scriptures taught by the Buddha. It gives instructions to build stupas, to build Buddhist institutions. And so by way of conclusion, many of you know the Lotus Sutra much better than I do, but the Lotus Sutra actually has a very optimistic view of the future. The Buddha, he died, but he also persists. By building stupas, great merit can be obtained. And so when we read these somewhat, let's say, less optimistic predictions of the future, I think there is some value in this, right? There's a reason why the Buddha was predicting the end of the Buddhist order. However, as Master Mogadishu implies, we don't know when that end will come. Those 2,000 years have long run out, and so we're running on extra time here. I think the idea is actually through action, through activity, perhaps we can extend this true doctrine even just a little bit longer. So that's all I have. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, finally, last but not least, Dr. Lindsay.
Hello. Perhaps somewhat naively, I decided to create a little presentation for you, but I promise it will be short. I am a quantitative psychologist working on the psychology of meditation, and I promise to all my friends in the humanities, I come in peace. So I think about the future of Buddhism a lot. I think something that myself and my colleagues within the contemplative sciences are trying to do is, if not build the foundation for a Buddhist future, we're at least attempting to clear the ground. If we think about the factors which will likely influence the future of Buddhism, science and technology is one that we really can't ignore in the way in which that will change our understanding of what it means to be human and even what it means to practice Buddhism potentially. But before I do that, I want to first say how Buddhism has transformed science. So over the last 40 years, we've been studying meditation practices in scientific psychology, and through interfacing with Buddhist ideas, Buddhist practitioners, and Buddhist practice ourselves, our attitudes towards our object have changed. So the first thing that has happened is we've expanded our view of human potential. Views of what was possible for human beings to achieve have been expanded by the study of advanced meditation practitioners. Meditation practitioners that have positive and abnormal, right, not usual, advancements in their abilities, in their cognitive abilities, in their experience of happiness, and even in their anatomy, so their neuroanatomy has been shown to be unique and extraordinary. So this has changed the way the cognitive sciences and neuroscience sees the potential of human beings. Another way that Buddhism has changed the scientific perspective is in the validation of human experience. So in the 20th century, a very hard materialistic view that even rejected the notion of consciousness was very common within the scientific view. This has changed. We now see the human experience and the first-person perspective as valid data to help us understand how the mind works and how human beings can become healthier. We've also, somewhat embarrassingly, have had to take up the idea of happiness and well-being as a topic of study. Psychology, in the Western world at least, for many years, focused exclusively on mental illness. But in encounters with people like the Dalai Lama and advanced monastics who chastised the science community for not having a science of well-being and happiness. So the initiation of positive psychology as a discipline is in part thanks to Buddhism. And finally, we are now bringing monks, advanced monks and contemplatives into our labs to collaborate on interdisciplinary and community-led projects to define what we're doing, what we're measuring, what our outcomes are, and what we should be researching, which I think is quite incredible. And I think the last point I wanted to make here is that also, what we're really trying to do is take practices and experiences that we have had that are inspiring to us and attempt to create an evidence base in order to show that it is effective, right? To prove beyond a doubt that this is effective and helpful, which has a lot of benefits. And so what have we been doing for 40 years? This all started in a way, and I was reflecting on this morning. It started actually here at Massachusetts General Hospital in 1982. One of the first studies of mindfulness meditation here, looking at what mindfulness can do for chronic pain. And it was demonstrated that a simple practice can attenuate and relieve pain that opioid medications could not. This was an incredibly eye-opening experience for the medical community and for the scientific community at large that transformed, again, our way of looking at human potential. These practices have been adapted to many different types of illness and reaching out to particular populations to try to help them. So PTSD, eating disorders, borderline personality disorder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These interventions focus on skill building, cognitive skill building. They're framed around relaxation, attention, and changing our relationship to thought patterns that are harmful. In the 2012-ish, we have our second wave where psychologists became interested in altruistic and compassion-based practices, loving-kindness-based practices. We have interventions coming out of Stanford and Emory University, and the development of the idea of self-compassion practices, which are a little bit paradoxical, but showing ourselves kindness. And this is an adaptation to meet the needs of people where they really needed to be met, people who needed this. And I'll note in this one that, at least with mindfulness-based practices, the direct link to Buddhism was a little bit hidden. But as we move into the 2012s, the link to Buddhism becomes more and more obvious. So the compassion training from Emory, for example, is based upon a Tibetan text and practice called the 7-point cause and effect bodhicitta practice. These interventions are framed around positive emotions, developing a sense of common humanity, and developing empathy and compassion. I had something I want to say about that, but I forget now. And then recently, just in the last few years, there's been an explosion of interest in wisdom and non-duality practices. So meditation scientists starting to take the extraordinary reports of experiences in meditation practice of advanced practitioners as objects of study. So we're starting to look at advanced jhana meditation, cessation experiences or nirodha, self-transcendent experiences, the dissolution of body boundaries in practice, and reports of non-duality, and even incredibly esoteric practices like tukdam practice in the Tibetan tradition or conscious dying. That's happening at University of Wisconsin-Madison. These meditations have not yielded standardized programs yet, but we're focusing mainly on how do we conceptualize and measure these experiences. So, in a sense, all of the practices of Buddhism are now influencing and being studied by folks like myself in the scientific psychology world. But as this creates opportunities for Buddhist practice to flourish and enter different spaces, it also brings some risks for the future. So the first thing it helps us do is enter places where religious language is not welcome. So we can enter healthcare settings and education settings, receive money to teach meditation in places where perhaps religious experience would not be welcome. Reaching out. It allows us to translate Buddhist practices across religious boundaries, right? The neutralized language of psychology allows us to bring practices into spaces in other religious contexts as well. It also allows us flexibility to adapt practices to a myriad of modern needs. And it allows us to really experiment on how do we optimize and change practices to reach people where they are, right? We can adapt traditional methods for modern needs. But it also brings with it some risks, right? Something at least I've observed in American Buddhist culture is, so for example, I teach undergrads sometimes, and often they will know what mindfulness is, but they don't know it comes from Buddhism, right? So there's a risk that these practices that have been decontextualized will make Buddhism less visible to people who only encounter these secularized forms. Another risk, we reduce the scope of practice. If we have these programs that allow us to meditate in a non-Buddhist context, the path to enlightenment can disappear, right? We lose the long view of what we're trying to accomplish with these programs, right? Maybe a risk that some of us don't think about is challenges to tradition and doctrine. Something that, unfortunately, science needs to do is prove things. And so it's possible that we may discover that some claims that Buddhism has maybe are not true, or not true in the way we thought, or different. Right? When we encounter that challenge, how will Buddhism respond? How will Buddhists respond? And finally, meditation as a product, as something to be sold, something to be owned, something to be experienced, right? The commercialization of meditation is something that my field has unfortunately enabled in great quantity. And this changes the nature of it. You know, one of my favorite parts of Buddhism is how these things were often offered for free and open to everyone. Now there is often a financial barrier in between people and meditation because of how we've commercialized it. I'm sure many of you will have other risks and benefits to bring to this discussion, but these are just a few that I thought off the top of my head. Thank you for listening.
Well, I'm very impressed with all the discussions from a philosophical point of view, from a social anthropological, social institutional point of view, and from a historical point of view, and the wonderful discussion on Buddhist temporality, which I've also read Natier's book and calculated some of this Kalpa temporal imagination, and it's amazing, but it really, the Buddhist ability to imagine time really outranks the time imaginable by modern physics and astronomy, because they've dated the Big Bang at 13.5 billion years, which is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket for the Buddhist imagination of time. So, and then I'm so glad to hear about the that Buddhism has turned around and now in its own way is helping to dictate scientific research, or to direct scientific research. So the, you know, religion and science don't have to be in opposition, but they can be working together. I think maybe since we don't have any discussants, we can open up to questions and comments from the audience, have some more interactive work. So we already have a point of view or discussion, comment or question. Yeah, it's coming. And you may direct it at a specific speaker or the whole panel. Yeah.
Actually, the question was carried over from yesterday because it was running out of time. My question is that recently there is a PBS documentary called American Muslims, and it's quite something that we can think about as Buddhist. Can we propose an American Buddhism or Buddhist for all the activities since 100 or 200 years ago in US that impact the American society? This is one question. So you can, that was for the panelists yesterday, but I have a second question, which is a new economic paradigm is called market humanism, proposed by an Oxford University professor named Eric Beinhacker. And it talks about humanistic capitalism, and versus what we are talking about here, humanistic Buddhism. I find some intersection or correlation between the two, especially they are all talking about human flourishing as an intersection of the two. So I think this is probably an area of research that's worth for the professors in all various departments to think about as a future development for Buddhism intersecting with the business and also with the capitalism.
Anyone on the panel would like to take up that question? Either question?
I think the filmmakers in the room need to take up that question of making that film.
Actually, I think William had a, yeah, you raised your hand.
I was more gesturing at our distinguished Professor Gold over here, but I'm happy to talk too. It's a wonderful question. What is American Buddhism? Professor Salguero brought this up yesterday. Scholars have wondered this for many years. There's 2 Buddhisms, there's 3 Buddhisms. How many Buddhisms can you name? I think I would put it this way. We do live in somewhat fragmentary time. I've been a bit of a downer on the panel, right? Everybody else is so optimistic, and I'm just reminding everybody they're going to die again. But I think something that I find wonderful about Buddhism, but that can also be a danger to it, is a certain lack of centralization. There is no Buddhist pope, right? Some people want to look to the Dalai Lama, for example, and listen to whatever he says. But he will very quickly say, as came up with the question of Buddhist nun ordination, that he's not the pope. It's not up to him. He's not the boss. He's not going to tell us what to do. And so I think how does an American Buddhism form a certain identity, perhaps a unified identity, rather than all these different fragmented forms that some scholars have noted, or even beyond that. I love Dr. Sun's ideas about re-internationalization and finding ways to join hands across international boundaries and historical grievances. These are wonderful ideas, and I would love to hear other people's thoughts about how to best do that, how to make an American Buddhism, or even just a stronger sense of a global Buddhism. I think that's yet to really be achieved. I have other thoughts on the second question, but I think I've already talked enough. Other people?
Okay. I think Wei Shan had Huang.
My question is actually very brief because we have this we have this luxury to asking a question about future of Buddhism. So I'm going to ask a question related to gender inequality and the gender equality within the Buddhism community. So any thought, historical, philosophy? We have 5 men on the panel. I would love to hear your answer. Thank you.
You're asking about gender equality in Buddhism as a huge, or equality. I mean, these are huge, is a huge question. And so the question is there, I'm going to take that as a question about what we predict for the future. It does seem like there are movements toward women's ordination in a variety of traditions. So that's an interesting shift. But the perspective that I'm trying to advocate for is a strategy for using Buddhist thought to break down barriers of all kinds, and I'm definitely drawing upon and using feminist theory and race theory in my analysis of how Buddhist concepts can understand and integrate social theories of a variety of kinds and make peace among different theories so that we can have a kind of shared structure, and that would allow a variety of feminist perspectives to maintain a legitimate critical voice without being emptied out of the moral status. So one of the problems for contemporary critical theory has been that it is critical, but it doesn't necessarily leave people a solid ground from which to rebuild. So I think that a Buddhist abstract framing, this is a little, I'd have to sort of go into it in a little bit more detail than I have comfort taking the time to do right now to explain, but I think a Buddhist framework allows for a lot of different critical voices to be heard without drowning each other out, without having to have one is the right one. And that, I think, can help us move past the kind of constant bickering that we have in our critical communities and move toward a more collaborative vision. So that's one possible answer.
I don't have an answer, but to tell you a episode, a doctoral student of us, and she wanted to. She was a financial analyst, and she evaluate a company through what they call ESG, and then and on the other hand, we know Buddhism have contribute in many social areas. Like economy and like social welfare. But in ESG evaluation, gender equality is important. And so she looking into what Buddhism can contribute to gender equality, and she found very, very few research on that. So that was her question for her PS dissertation to be. So the question is that whether the source or text, the source of Buddhism doesn't really explicitly offer gender equality, or so I mean, no. That's the question, kind of.
I mean, this is a disputed question, right? So there are feminist readings of Buddhist thought that see the doctrine of emptiness as a possible source for theorizing gender equity, because all gender is only illusory, and you have sutra literature that emphasizes this in various narrative forms. The Vimalakirti Sutra is the most commonly used, but you also have the restoration of gender hierarchies within these same sutras. So it's not it has to be abstracted from those historical sources in order to be articulated, but it has been used and articulated, right? So every religious tradition has historical sources that are fundamentally, sexist. So all the texts, if you go pre-modern, everything is, in this way. But then people have worked with these texts and tried to find, ethical basis, ethical transformations, and that's been done with Buddhist texts in the last century as well.
Hello. Yeah. I'd like to make a somewhat bolder prediction. As a friend of mine just said in the break a little while ago, you can't tame it unless you can name it. And I feel that this is actually a question of suffering. And that I predict that gender equality is an inevitable evolution in Buddhism, because if we're serious about identifying suffering and relieving it, I don't know that we can now unsee social critique and gender analysis. So it's only a matter of time, because now we know that it's a cause of suffering, that this will suffuse Buddhist communities and become a natural part of what we do. That's my hope, at least.
I just want to throw in something because I'm currently teaching a class called Gender and Sexuality in Modern Asia. And also I've been thinking about gender too. And I think that, that there is an irony in that in the modern age, women are often the primary repositories of traditional religiosities, and men tend more easily to get sucked into the capitalist state machinery because there are more opportunities for them. And so women, I did a piece on shamanism in China where it's the women who are the spirit mediums and shamans, and they hear the voices because they're still more sensitized to those voices of gods and ancestors. And so the irony is that it's the women who are embodying traditional religiosities more, but they are not seen or heard as much because they're less visible, they're more suppressed, and yet they are the ones going out there, like Tzu Chi's women are going out there quietly. They're not making a big voice to announce themselves. And so it's kind of like, to me, like a lot of women politicians, they can be leaders, but they can't bring attention to their gender, and they have to suppress that gender. So, yes, Professor Dr. He.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, when we depict the future of Buddhism, I think we try to avoid the kind of ideal that, well, the whole world could be the Buddhist. I think this is wrong assumption. It's a very dangerous assumption as well. So we don't want everybody become the Buddhist because it create a problem, right? Create a war. Some fundamentalists in every religion, Muslim, Christian, they may say, hey, the whole world become a Muslim, become a Christian. I think that's a wrong assumption. If we can predict the future of Buddhism, I think the Buddhists have to provide the compassion and love. So when you talk about the human right, or we talk about the gender equality, I think the Buddha advocated equality for all essential beings, not only for the gender or for the human being and essential being. Of course, the bhikkhuni maybe have a so-called a heavy rule or heavy garu dharma, but that's from Donna Lopez's research that was planted in the latter day of Buddha's nirvana. Just after Buddha reached the nirvana, and then his disciple planned in this kind of rule according to his research. It's quite right. So I think when we talk about the equal right, in the West we talk about right, but for the Buddha I talk about love. So in the other way, right is to have equality, but the other way is for the Buddha is love. So I think the only way we can depict or develop future Buddhism is because Buddhist compassion, altruism, harmony, and upon the ideal of interdependent origination is have the common goodness. As Professor Sun saying that, if we want to reinterpret the Buddhism, that could be create the harmony, create the altruism spirit in different field, as well create the eventually common good. So this kind of fundamentalist ideal should be avoided. This is the first thing. Second, emphasize more on compassion and altruism. With the altruism and compassion, that we can reach the harmonious relationship between those conflict we face. I told 6 conflict we face, like human to environment, to technology, rich and poor, nation, races, and cultures. So I think the core of Buddhism have to benefit all sentient beings, no matter they recognize it's Buddhism or not. It could be very radical for the traditional Buddhism, like practice meditation. They enjoy this kind of a peaceful and calmness, but forget that it's Buddhism. But there's another danger that from Buddhist side is that without Dharma, merely meditation, merely take it as a tool is not adequate. So as we're saying that Buddhism is not only a tool, it's also a Dharma, a wisdom. The compassion and wisdom have to two parallel that have to go together. So in one way, we want benefit all sentient being, not only provide a tool, but provide the wisdom. But whether they become a Buddhist is less important. We have seen the history of religion. There's a lot of time that when a big organization, the dominant society, they persecute those, heretics. This is very dangerous. It's no matter it's Buddhism, Christianity, or Muslim. So I think in the long run, how we advocate Buddhist compassion, altruism, harmony to reach the common goodness, I think this is the most important work. So we have many ways to do the research, right? For the tech, for the political dialogue, as Jonathan Go, or for the karmic, research. Well, they're all very good and very much fulfill the scientific methodology as well as humanity methodology. So that's I believe. Even from my foundation, I always tell the Tzu Chi member, do not say that everybody should be Tzu Chi members. It's a wrong assumption, and it's a dangerous assumption that normally create conflict within the religion. So Tzu Chi, I think that for a Master Cheng Yen's ideal, those Muslim member, Christian member, Protestant member, or atheists, they can all be Tzu Chi member. They enjoy the Tzu Chi's merit, or they enjoy the Buddhist wisdom, but without saying they are Buddhist. I think this is one important element we predict or we develop future of Buddhism. Okay. Sorry, no question, just a comment. Sorry for that. Yeah.
One other question.
My question is about terminology and the implications for the future of Buddhism. And recently there's been a lot of critique about engaged Buddhism, whereas in this conference it's applied Buddhism. I just would love to hear from the panelists about which term you prefer as we think about the future of Buddhism.
Terminology question, anybody going for that? Engaged Buddhism versus applied Buddhism.
I don't have an opinion.
There's also humanistic Buddhism. Dr. Wu? Yeah.
Well, when we speak of engaged Buddhism, I think of the royal couple, right? Christopher Queen and Sally King. And what I read from their book is that when they talk about engaged Buddhism, they're referring not just Buddhism as engaging in the world, but in a particular way. So they, for example, in Sally's work, she defined it more specifically by calling it socially engaged Buddhism, and or political engaged Buddhism. Now, so when you speak of engaged Buddhism, well, because Buddhism is always engaging with the society and the human being and the whole world, so it doesn't make too much sense, right? But if you talk about social or political engagement, that may highlight something that we may address, because it's usually in traditional Buddhism is almost overlooked, especially in the Han Chinese tradition. But when we talk about humanistic Buddhism, it's something different, right? Now, and not just the concern is different, the mode of mobilization people is different. For example, there's not appealing so much on conflict, and the way they try to solve the problem or to make the problem visualized not through confrontation, protest, but well, for example, in these cases, you try to supplement it. Well, I also draw on the work by Putnam. I will say that, well, humanistic Buddhism is more performing a kind of supplemental model, all right, to supplement and what is in need. So I think there's a major difference between the two. I want to ask one more question because I think it is very important, is that I think the future of Buddhism must address the two things. Technology. We're trying to clear the ground, right? Yeah, of the present in order to prepare for the future. Well, no one could ignore the advancement of technology, especially AI, all right, and cyber world, right? We are facing a new generation of population, not necessarily all to be Buddhist, right, as Professor Ho has suggested, but most likely, most of them, if not all, in the future generation, is native, right? They are born in the net world, cyber world, right? Well, in the future, I don't think we need to travel to Harvard to hold this conference in person. Well, we can hold it actually in current technology allow us to do it in cyber world, all right? Right now we can do it, right? So what are we going to do? What kind of strategies we are going to use in order to meet the challenge or opportunity of new technology? Are we going to employ Dharma Arbot, AI Dharma Arbot? Are you ready to accept it? Robot. Arbot and robot. Maybe Arbot robots, right? So this is something that we really need to challenge when we considering the future of Buddhism. The other thing is that I must call for, from the bottom of my heart, is that if you really emphasize on equality, let's take it seriously. The challenge about animal, the case about animal suffering, well, the case about the ecological crisis, all right? From a Buddhist perspective, when we talk about the care for all sentient beings, not just for human beings, we need to explore how we can help for other sentient beings, other animals, and the important environment that they rely upon to sustain and grow together with human beings. So we need to engage with that. If we want to explore to a new world and convince others to not to be converted to be Buddhist, but to walk with us to solve the problem together. Thank you.
When we say engage, which means that Buddhism did not engage in the past, so we come out the engage Buddhism. It's the very first step. Then we say the humanist Buddhism, it means that the Buddhism is for the human realm. But Buddhism is not only for human realm, it's also for animal realm. So here comes the cyber realm. We treat cyber realm as equal to human realm? Well, a conscience can create everything according to Buddha's teaching. So still, 6 realm, maybe including cyber realm, so 7 realm. So applied Buddhism is broader than humanist Buddhism, because Buddhism is only for human. You could have a 6 realm, now we have a 7 realm or cyber realm. We treat cyber realm equally. We perceive that eventually that cyber realm have a conscience, has their own will. It's possible because everything was created by humans' conscience. Human has talent to create everything they want. So essentially, go back to core of the Buddhism. We said about, repeat again, compassion, altruism. Those can apply to all realms, including cyber realm. So we have no fear of cyber RAN eventually. If we can treat cyber RAN with compassion and altruism, design it as a very altruistic, well, we should be no trouble, right? In response to your terminology. So I think Applied Buddhism is broader and more, proactive instead of passive engagement or limited to the human RAN.
These are really great questions, and I'd be happy to answer them over dinner.
Okay, 6 o'clock finished?
Oh yeah, time is up.
All right, so thank you so much for our entire panel and also the audience for really joining in on the conversation. So invite all of you to please stand and move to the front so we can take a group photo. And we will also invite the former director of Tzu Chi Boston Service Center, Vicki Chang, to present the gifts for everyone. So this concludes the sessions for day 2. Tomorrow morning we will be starting at 9 a.m. So please join us and have a wonderful evening.